Henry Cavill is one seriously unlucky actor. His entire career is a story of grinding it out. There's barely a single lucky break to speak of. Everything he achieved, he's had to fight for. So, today we're talking about Henry Cavill, once known as Fat Cavill. Why is he called the unluckiest actor around? Which legendary roles slipped through his fingers? Where did his reputation as Hollywood's top gamer come from? And why is it better to be a regular bro than a young Greek god? You're watching Hollywood Lore. Let's go. Henry Cavill's very first movie was Proof of Life in 2000, and his role there was so microscopic it's not even listed in most filmographies. But he's definitely in it. You just need X-ray vision to spot him. Still, Cavill sees that film as a turning point, all because he met Russell Crowe on set. Instead of begging for an autograph or asking for a selfie with the star of his favorite film Gladiator, 16-year-old Henry straight up asked Crowe what it's actually like to be an actor. Russell wasn't exactly known for acting like a diva on set, so he took the time to talk to the kid and drop some life advice. A couple days later, Cavill got a signed Gladiator poster in the mail and a note from Crowe that said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." From that moment on, two things happened. Crowe became Henry's #1 actor, and Henry started seriously thinking about Hollywood. Teenage Cavill did some drama club acting, but he was involved in a bunch of stuff, so theater wasn't exactly his main thing. Also, he was chubby back then, which earned him the nickname Fat Cavill. Realizing that Fat Cavill vibe wasn't exactly a ticket to leading man roles, he dropped 20 kilos in no time. So when Henry's real debut came around, he was already flashing sharp cheekbones on screen. That debut was in an Italian-Canadian thriller called Laguna. These days, the movie is mostly remembered for one thing. Young Henry Cavill had a sex scene with Roman Polanski's wife. The actor was a little buzzed in this one. Seeing how nervous the young Cavill was, the actress insisted they give him a drink. Considering the effect Henry tends to have on his female co-stars, she might have had other reasons for wanting to get him loosened a bit. But that's a whole different conversation.
Report to the ship as soon as possible. We're bang, okay?
In 2002, Cavill landed a bigger project, The Count of Monte Cristo. Initially, the lead role of Edmond Dantes was offered to Arnold Schwarzenegger, but he passed. Probably because he found out the director would be Kevin Reynolds, the same guy who gave us the triumphant disaster Waterworld, which almost zeroed Kevin Costner's career. James Caviezel wasn't afraid to take the lead, and Henry clearly was happy just to be anywhere near the action. The Count of Monte Cristo didn't exactly set the box office on fire, and at the time, didn't do much for Cavill's career either. The payoff for that project came a few years later. In the meantime, Henry's filmography expanded with cinematic titans, like the tiny indie I Capture the Castle, and straight-to-video Hellraiser Hellworld and Red Riding Hood. In 2006, Cavill finally got that Monte Cristo bonus. Kevin Reynolds cast him in another film, Tristan and Isolde. The movie flopped in theaters. But hey, at least it was in theaters at all, which on paper should have meant better chances for Henry at auditions. But that's just theory. In practice, things somehow got even worse. To quote the classics, on what seemed like a smooth Hollywood adventure, Cavill suddenly took an arrow in the knee. Not one, but 3 of them, actually. That's exactly why the press later labeled him the unluckiest actor in Hollywood. And honestly, they've got a point. It started small. First, the role of Cedric Diggory in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire got snatched right from under Cavill's nose by Robert Pattinson. And Pattinson would pull the same move again later, but we'll get to that. Losing Cedric was only half the pain, though. What really hurt was missing out on the role of James Bond, which was supposedly almost his. Nowadays, the idea of a 22-year-old white hetero handsome man portraying Bond sounds kind of hilarious. But imagine that in the mid-2000s, it was dead serious. Director Martin Campbell and the producers of Casino Royale were actually considering Cavill, and even thought about rewriting the script to fit him. According to people involved, Henry was the only real contender besides Daniel Craig. In the end, they decided Cavill was just too young, and if you're going to be consuming vodka martinis on camera, you've got to look a bit more experienced in the matter. Cavill also missed out on playing Superman. Yep, you heard that right. He could have been Clark Kent even earlier in Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. That's the same role Brendan Fraser also missed out on, right before depression hit him like a train and his career went downhill. Sure, Superman Returns would have been a different movie with Cavill or Fraser, but chances are neither of them would have freaked out if they knew how it would all turn out. That film tanked Brandon Routh's career, the so-called lucky guy Singer chose. The turning point in this whole wild streak of failures came in 2007, when Henry landed a role in the British series The Tudors. Probably Tristan and Isolde film actually helped him. He was already rocking medieval outfits there and kind of looked the part. The show's creators figured such a guy could come in handy, not quietly lurking in the background, but actively seducing ladies on the front row. Some say Cavill's character's bedroom activity had a very direct impact on the ratings. Critics were into it too. The Tudors got nominated for Golden Globes and Emmys more than once. And while Henry didn't walk away with any trophies, he did get something more important at the time: attention. That attention could have paid off better, to be honest. In the next few years, Cavill showed up in Stardust, Whatever Works, and Blood Creek. We've already talked about Blood Creek in our video about Michael Fassbender. That movie was one of the last projects by Joel Schumacher, once known for Flatliners, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin, which basically nuked his career. And after the number 23, Schumacher went straight into the bizarre territory where Blood Creek also lived, featuring Nazi relics buried somewhere in rural USA. That cinematic gem tanked at the box office, and critics tore it apart, but weirdly enough, neither Cavill's nor Fassbender's careers took a hit. Instead of fighting Nazi zombies, Cavill could have been fighting werewolves, sparkling in the sun and giving Bella Swan a full-on facial paralysis. But once again, all that went to Robert Pattinson, who snagged the role of Edward in Twilight right out from under Henry. The funny part here is that author Stephenie Meyer actually pictured Henry Cavill when she wrote Edward Cullen. She'd seen him in The Tudors and was totally blown away. Naturally, Meyer pushed hard for Henry to get the role, but the filmmakers once again pulled the age card. Too young to be Bond, too old to be a vampire. Younger Pattinson had to take this painful hit instead. Cavill did eventually land a leading role in a potential blockbuster in 2011. But there was a catch. The young actor was strictly told to get into the absolute best shape of his life. Director Tarsem Singh wanted something between Renaissance and 300, meaning maxed out muscles and pumped body parts. Still, Henry was told to chill for now and enjoy his cheeseburgers. The film was having funding issues, and they needed to secure cash for coaches first. Cavill ignored this Omega talk and paid for gym sessions out of his pocket. Once financing came through, the studio did start covering his coach, but stopped after a couple months when the main investor pulled out. A few months later, the whole cycle repeated, and this time, Cavill was directly told to curb his enthusiasm. The whole project might not even happen. So, for about a year and a half, investors kept coming and going from Immortals. But one thing was unchanged. Henry, who kept paying for his own training and grinding 6 to 7 hours a day in the gym. By the time shooting finally began, the actor didn't just have a 6-pack. He had an 8-pack, which meant the studio got a nice deal. They saved money on the coach and didn't need extra body makeup because Henry was already carved like a damn young Greek god. Immortals did well at the box office, making $227 million on a budget of $75. Audiences clearly appreciated the results of all that gym time. Unlike the director of Cavill's next film, The Cold Light of Day, which he'd signed on for before the whole Immortals drama. When the director saw Cavill with 6% body fat, his eyes nearly popped out. He said he hadn't cast a young Kratos. He wanted a regular dude, which is exactly what the role called for. So Cavill was handed a Burger King coupon and banned from touching anything heavier than a spoon. Audiences didn't understand the absence of the 8-pack and skipped the movie entirely. It flopped hard at the box office, but by that point, Henry didn't care. He'd already landed the role that made him a star. As it often goes with big studio projects, this movie could have turned out completely different. It almost wasn't Zack Snyder directing it. Darren Aronofsky, Guillermo del Toro, Robert Zemeckis, Ben Affleck, and Tony Scott were all considered at some point. The latter declared he only saw Denzel Washington as Superman, and right after that, Snyder was immediately chosen. Christopher Nolan's advice to hire the director of his beloved movie The Watchmen also probably helped a bit. There was a long line of contenders for the role of Clark Kent, too, including Armie Hammer, Matthew Good, and Captain Eyeliner Colin O'Donoghue. But according to Snyder, Henry stood out even among this sausage fest party. He was the only one who managed not to look ridiculous but powerful, wearing the red and blue tights during screen tests. Later on, a story appeared that Henry almost missed out on this life-changing role because he was too busy farming boars in World of Warcraft and didn't hear Zack Snyder's call. These days, pretty much everyone knows the actor is a hardcore gamer. That little detail is now in every corner of the internet. Why that part of his life only surfaced years later, we'll get into soon, but for now it's worth noting. Henry's all about gaming, but he wasn't into comics. So when production started, the actor barely knew anything about Superman. He took learning about comics as one of the primary quests and completed it pretty fast. Then came gym adventures, again. This time under the guidance of a coach personally appointed by Snyder. Both the actor and the director kept hyping each other up with talk about crafting the perfect Clark Kent body, no rubber muscle pads allowed, and a fired-up Henry spared no effort getting into top shape. Russell Crowe also praised Cavill's dedication and was happy for his protégé's success. As Crowe himself admitted, not entirely from the heart, though. He was a bit jealous of that ridiculous beauty, but still wished Henry all the best as much as he could. Man of Steel made $670 million at the box office on a reported budget of $225. Some say the real number was higher, plus another $100 million dumped into marketing, meaning the total cost was about $350 million. Consider that cinemas also need to make a living, and it becomes clear that the studio basically earned nothing compared to Avengers or Dark Knight Rises, which both obliterated the box office a year ago. Those numbers marked the beginning of all the wrong decisions with the DC Universe. Despite the disappointment, a Man of Steel sequel was probably going to happen. Word is they were already working on a script, but then Henry's bad luck kicked in again. Warner Brothers saw that sweet, sweet box office money superhero mashup can make and started drooling. So Man of Steel sequel suddenly turned into Batman vs. Superman, and the studio wanted it done ASAP, preferably yesterday. Cavill showing up in the movie wasn't exactly a shocker, but Affleck's involvement raised a few eyebrows, especially since he'd sworn multiple times that he'd never suit up in tights again. Most confused of all was Josh Hartnett, who years earlier had been warned by Affleck never to accept Nolan's offer to play Batman. Affleck promised Hartnett a biblical plague and a swarm of locusts if he did. Spooked by the prophecy, Josh said no, and that was pretty much the quiet end of his run as a big-time star. Years later, Ben gladly took the Batman role himself, figuring lightning doesn't strike twice, and there wouldn't be the second Daredevil in his career. And for a moment, it looked like he was right. Batman vs. Superman crushed it in test screenings and pulled in nearly $500 million during its opening weekend. But still, there was a karma celebration on Josh Hartnett's street because all those glorious facts came with a few interesting details. First off, rumor has it that the test screenings for Batman vs. Superman were held only for highly important people at Warner. It was them who liked what they saw, not some average moviegoer. And then the film actually hit theaters. Audiences were spitting at the screens, and critics handed it a nice big basket of Razzies. Highly important people were a bit surprised by how things turned out, but at that point, there was nothing they could do. The box office record in the first weekend was an even more beautiful sight to behold. In just 3 days, the movie pulled in $424 million, better than any superhero movie before, even the Avengers. But by week 2, Batman vs. Superman flatlined, eventually making $874 million. In other words, it made as much in the first 3 days as it did in all the remaining ones combined. That kind of drop-off is one of the worst in box office history. Considering the movie's total cost with marketing expenses was around $415 million, Warner Brothers walked away with just enough profit to maybe buy a couple supercars. And odds are those went to highly important people who greenlit the whole thing in the first place. And that's assuming Batman vs. Superman's budget wasn't underreported, unlike what happened later with Captain Marvel. One thing that hints at some sketchy money stuff is the mess around Cavill's paycheck for this movie. Everywhere you look, it says he got $14 million. But the actor himself swears he's never seen anything close to that. Despite all the drama and the possibly stolen paychecks, the DC Universe movies clearly gave Henry's career a solid boost. In 2015, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. came out, with Guy Ritchie casting Cavill as the obvious James Bond material. Originally, Henry was supposed to play the Russian spy, and the American one was going to be Tom Cruise. But Cruise bailed, so Henry talked the director into letting him take over the now open role, and Armie Hammer ended up playing the Russian spy. The movie ran into a ton of problems. Bad test screenings, reshoots, all that. And when it flopped at the box office, making just $110 million, costing $75, any talk of a franchise disappeared real quick. Henry was seriously disappointed. He was happy to finally do a movie where he didn't have to walk around in tight clothes or no clothes at all, just focus on acting for once. Cavill really liked Guy Ritchie's filming rules. No endless chicken and rice meals, no grinding out a million sets at the gym every day. The actor wanted in on Ritchie's movie King Arthur, and even made it onto the director's shortlist. But in the end, Ritchie went with Hunnam, saying he needed someone who looked like a bro, not like James Bond or a young Greek god. At this point, only the laziest person alive doesn't know about the drama behind Justice League. the film that basically started the collapse of the DC cinematic universe. But here's a quick recap for anyone who spent the last few years in a vault and missed this nuclear disaster. Zack Snyder was the one directing Justice League, directing, suffering, and crying. The highly important people from the studio were breathing down his neck the whole time, telling him what to do and how to do it. After he delivered exactly what they asked for, important people decided they didn't like it and told Zack to reshoot the damn thing. But then the director was hit with a family tragedy, and he and his wife Deborah, who was also producing the film, stepped away from the project. That's when Joss Whedon was brought in to finish the job, ideally making the movie just as awesome as The Avengers. During reshoots, it suddenly turned out Cavill had already moved on to Mission Impossible Fallout, sprinting around with Tom Cruise. All fine except for one thing. Apparently, running with Tom Cruise required a mustache. Warner begged Paramount to reconsider and let Henry shave, even offered to cover the CGI costs themselves, which made sense. Adding a mustache in post-production is way easier than removing one. But Paramount figured they didn't want any jokes about Cavill's mustache in their movie, so Warner had to spend somewhere between $12 and $25 million just to digitally erase Superman's whiskers. And in the end, all the jokes about the most expensive facial hair in Hollywood history landed on Justice League, not Tom Cruise. Joss Whedon shot about an hour of new footage for the movie, but even that was butchered in the editing room. Most of the jokes were cut because, apparently, it was all starting to feel a bit too much like The Avengers. And this thing was supposed to be darker. Why they hired the Avengers director for the reshoots in the first place is a question for the brainiacs out there. In short, the big professionals working on Justice League managed to screw up pretty much everything, and the movie was completely destroyed upon release. Justice League made $660 million on a budget of $300, and once you add in marketing costs, it ended up flopping at the box office. Meanwhile, Mission Impossible did just fine as usual, with almost half the budget it pulled in over $800 million. So by 2018, Cavill's situation looked like this. Superman was on the verge of collapse. Nobody was calling him to play bros or regular dudes, and only a chosen few get to ride Tom Cruise's leprechaun magic from film to film. Henry needed a new project, and he found one on Netflix. It's generally agreed Geralt isn't exactly supposed to look like a young Greek god, let alone Superman. Of course, we all know Netflix has its own unique take on what an authentic look means in adaptations, but even they weren't considering Cavill for the role of Geralt at first. Henry strongly disagreed with that and made it clear to Netflix, proposing himself as the lead. He backed it up by saying he'd read all of Sapkowski's books, played the CD Projekt Red games, and was basically a level 80 Gwynblade, who either sleeps hugging his PC or hunts Al-Ghouls every night. Netflix loved these facts and started spreading them everywhere, building up the actor's perfect gamer reputation. That helped him land the role, even though Henry doesn't exactly look like an average Swallow consumer. The Witcher series owed its popularity more to the games than the books, and Netflix was clearly aiming at the gaming fan base. So that's how Henry became the ultimate gamer among all Hollywood gamers. It was a win-win. Women weren't scared off by that usually intimidating fact, and the male audience now saw him as a real bro. And a real bro doesn't have to look exactly like the canon Geralt. Cavill managed to score a pretty sweet deal on The Witcher, by the way. The budget for the first season was reportedly around $65 million, which isn't exactly huge for a project like that. But Henry was pulling in $400,000 per episode, meaning he made over $3 million just for season 1. Henry took on a few other Netflix projects as well, popping up in Enola Holmes and earlier in Sandcastle. Somehow he also managed to show up in a tiny movie called Night Hunter, which scored a glorious 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. In 2021, the seemingly dying DC universe energized a bit. The Snyder Cut of Justice League dropped, a director's version running nearly 4 hours. It hit streaming right away and instantly got beat in viewership by Mortal Kombat, which only cost $55 million. The Snyder Cut cost $75, but it's hard to judge fairly, as it wasn't a brand new film. Also, the audiences actually liked it, despite a runtime that even Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter might be jealous of. Still, Warner Brothers wasn't impressed, and eventually got downright horrified by the box office numbers for the Suicide Squad sequel and Black Adam. Cavill made a cameo in the latter, teasing that The Rock's next throwdown would be with Superman. But as we all know by now, that fight ain't happening. After flop, the studio decided to just reboot the whole damn thing, so from 2022, Cavill is not Clark Kent anymore. There's a new Superman movie in post-production now, but let's be real. Who in 2025 actually gives a crap? Around the same time, Cavill also walked away from The Witcher. He said the show was great, the people were talented, and everything was going according to plan, but he didn't want to be part of a plan where the talented people hadn't read the Witcher books or played the games. Henry powered through Season 3 with that white wig by sheer willpower, then wished good luck to budget Chris Hemsworth, Liam, who's replacing him. So from Season 4 on, it'll be Liam in the wig and yellow contacts, proudly carrying the show into some kind of future. In 2024, Cavill appeared in several movies. In one, he's on screen for a whole 10 seconds. In another, maybe 10 minutes. Argyle ended up being one of Apple's biggest flops. Despite the all-star cast party, it tanked completely in theaters. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare flopped too, despite cosplaying Inglourious Bastards. But there's still some hope left for another Guy Ritchie collab, The Gray Zone. That one was supposed to come out earlier this year, but the release got delayed. No one really knows why, so we can only hope it's because the film's quality is just too good, and the world just needs more time to prepare for such cinematic revelation. After hearing all that, it might sound like Henry's career is tanking again, like he's back to being cursed, but that's not quite true. First, the fact that Guy Ritchie now sees Cavill as a legit bro and keeps casting him is already a good sign. Sure, Ritchie tries hard to scrub the polished Greek god vibe off Henry in every film, but hey, it's working. Second, Amazon finally managed to strike a deal with Games Workshop and started to make series based on Warhammer, Henry's personal obsession. Given it's Amazon, there's a risk we might end up with female space wolves and Henry playing their bards, singing songs about tossing coins. Let's just hope, pray, and beg the Emperor it doesn't come to that. Funny enough, one of Henry's upcoming projects has him swinging a sword around again. This time it's not Geralt, but Duncan MacLeod. The Highlander reboot is being directed by Chad Stahelski, the guy behind all the John Wick movies. They said filming would start in the first half of this year, but clearly someone's still calibrating something because the project is still stuck in pre-production. Another Amazon project, Voltron, just wrapped filming a few days ago and is expected to hit screens sometime next year. Cavill's upcoming roles don't seem to rely on him being ridiculously good-looking. You don't see viral montages of actresses drooling over him during press tours anymore. The guy's grilling steaks, modeling Warhammer minis, gaming, and talking about what it's like being a dad. Basically, Henry is showing he's just a regular bro, and that kind of guy has access to way more roles than a young Greek god. So maybe thanks to these efforts, the actor's streak of bad luck will be over someday, with Cavill focusing purely on acting, not his body fat percentage, which by the way is exactly what Michael Fassbender's been doing since 300, and his portfolio now includes some seriously strong acting work, totally unbothered by Charlize Theron's public confessions about wanting to touch him in some interesting places. We've got a video on Michael too, go check it out. Thanks for watching and don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that. See you next time.